This conversation is brought to you ad-free thanks to the generous support of the Howl in the Wilderness Patreon community. To gain access to early release of all episodes, the full podcast archives, and other extras, visit patreon.com/Howl in the Wilderness. They want us to be relying on their AI companion.
That too. I spent so much time trying to figure out how to get that window to go away, and apparently you can't.
It just keeps coming back. I know.
Yeah.
They're really pushing AI. And I feel we must resist.
We must resist. Absolutely. Big time.
Well, Safron Rossi, it's great to have you back on the podcast, and I'm really excited that we'll be talking about Artemis today as part of my Mythic Figures series.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just to begin, I got to say, this is, I think, the third conversation I've had in this series. And in the week preceding every conversation, I've had the most incredible synchronicities. So I've been delving into Artemis lore and refreshing myself on your book on the Kore and the sections on Artemis. And last night there was 3 deer who came like right up to the house and were just kind of chilling. And normally my little dog would be at the window barking, scaring them off. But she just sat there looking out the window. Deer just mildly eating leaves off the tree and drinking from the little pond out front. And it was, what's the word, idyllic in a way. And I just felt like the presence of Artemis. Yeah, it's just incredible. I mean, that's rare because we have a lot of deer around here, but they're not kind of the domesticated deer that we get in the city. They're still pretty wild. And so to have them come up right up to the house like that was really kind of special.
That's wonderful. Yeah. I think there's something to be said for sure about when we begin attuning to these different archetypal figures and what they personify, in life. It's like they begin to meet us, in these really beautiful ways. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I had been feeling like a little distance from Artemis. Like Hermes, when I start getting into Hermes, he's like right there, Yeah. But like with Artemis, I was feeling this kind of distance. I was like, I don't know if I'm like really connecting with her. And then just like yesterday and today, it's been like, oh, she's here. But It took a while. It took like this kind of courtship, I guess. Yeah.
Well, and I think that makes a lot of sense because of the very nature of our lives, living in, like we live in a post-industrial digital civilization. We are so embedded within, in many ways, sort of Athena's world. Like we are embedded within the civilized world. And what does Artemis personify but wilderness? Wilderness both in the sense of physical nature, being in the wild, wild animals, but also in terms of the inner world, the wilderness of the instinctual dimension of life and our and our emotional life. Civilization, the work of civilization, both affects outer nature in the development of houses and utilities and, all these things that we, in the Western world for sure benefit from. But in terms of our inner life, civilization also separates from and shifts and alters our relationship to the instinctual and emotional dimension of our nature. So I think in many ways, Artemis is how do we attune to her? It takes doing and it takes consciousness, because of how the way we are, by nature of our inner and outer civilization.
Mm-hmm. I was curious because I'd reached out to a number of people to invite people to contribute to the series. And you stepped forward and said, can we talk about Artemis? Or I'd like to talk about Artemis. And I'm wondering, what is it about her that you feel is important for people to know or to connect to?
Well, I think this whole notion of how civilized we are, consciously and unconsciously, is a really huge piece. And I drew together a couple of things that I thought just to offer, your listeners, because it's such a profoundly important piece of in terms of our sort of psychological sensitivity. And the first thing is that, so I'm going to try to thread these things together. I have an insight from the archetypal psychologist Jeanette Paris. I've got a really important passage from Jung, and then I've got a poem that I want to read you. So I've kind of got a little bit of a plan, if that's okay. But what I think in terms of what is so significant about Artemis is the sense of our relationship to nature. And by nature, I mean it like capital N, archetypal, the archetypal power and potency of nature. And Artemis personifies this because where we see her in the myths and in the poems that come to us from, the ancient Greeks, is that she's always in the vast wilderness. Her domain is an imaginal place called Arcadia. It's a place that humans can't go. It's totally unaffected by human civilizing impulses. And this is, and that sort of purity of the wilderness as an imaginal landscape is also on another level reflected in the fact that she's a chore or a virgin goddess, meaning that where on the one hand the landscape itself is untouched, she too is untouched. And I think that there's something really profoundly important about that dimension of experience and the psyche, which is the places of where we are or experience a sense of pure essential beingness, unaffected by other people's needs, technological media, institutional values. You see what I mean?
Yeah, so, even societal norms.
Exactly. That's right. That's right. So I think perhaps if I were to sort of try to condense it to one thing with you, I would say that Artemis is so profoundly significant because of how she sanctifies virginity or the virgin pure places as a metaphorical. It's a metaphor for the untouched dimensions of our psyche, and then we can extend that in terms of the world. And And that's, you know, what I was talking about, sort of laying out in a much bigger way in my book on the Kore, which is that the Kore archetype, which Artemis personifies in a really specific way, has to do with what it is to be unto oneself, that part of us that is undivided from ourselves, which we might talk about as sort of our essential nature, that sense of beingness that I have as an individual that in its own way is independent from who I am in relationship to my partner and my students and my clients and my family, like all these really important roles that are part of my sense of self. But what is it? Who am I at its most, at my deepest, perhaps even most like sacred core? The Kore personifies that sense of self.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's something about her her isolation or seclusion that just points me toward, okay, if I want to get in touch with that part of myself, I may have to retreat from, duties of family, my role in the community. So I may have to take these periods of retreat and isolation in order to connect with that core essence.
That's right. That's right. So we could say that solitude is one of the central ways that we can cultivate a relationship to our core interiority, or our Artemisian, our relationship to Artemis. And see, this goes to this little quote I wanted to read from Jeanette Paris, who is a really brilliant archetypal psychologist, and I can't recommend her books, Pagan Meditations and Pagan Grace, enough because of the way she illuminates how the gods show up in our lives. But this is one of my favorite passages of hers about Artemis, which is from the book Pagan Meditations. She says, Artemis comes to sanctify solitude, natural and primitive living, to which we may all return whenever we find it necessary to belong only to ourselves. An Amazon and infallible archer, Artemis guarantees our resistance to a domestication that would be too complete. See, and I think that's the thing that you were just talking about, Brian. We become domesticated by, all of our life responsibilities and relationships, and by nature of just living in our worlds, we become domesticated. And Artemis personifies the breaking away from our being so safely contained within those roles in order to come back in touch with, in a way, something primitive in us. And by that, I mean raw, as in unshaped and directed by expectations, responsibilities, and the list goes on in terms of the structures of our lives. And how do we do that? We can only do that if we actually pull away, right? We actually retreat and disconnect from those spaces.
Yeah, primitive, primal, primary, like first. Like we could say even like maybe the original self.
Right.
Our first nature. We talk about things becoming second nature, and those are usually the things, those kind of domesticated things.
Right.
I've got some good manners that's, I'm so good at it that's become like second nature.
Right.
But the first nature might be a little more bristly,
Right.
less cultivated or cultured.
Yeah. Or even, for so many of us, it's second nature to want to be responsive and attentive to what our partners or our children need, right? And we're there and how are you doing? Oh, it looks like you've had kind of a bad day. What might make you feel better? And the way we're constantly attuning to that. But we can be so oriented toward the other and attending to the other, we can really lose touch with what we may need, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's another facet of perhaps our second nature. How do we stay close to our emotional truth, or maybe like our emotional response to something, and then the feeling truth that then emerges when we are in touch with ourselves, with our inner reality. And that's part of our first nature, isn't it? Being in touch with our inner reality.
Yeah, and there's something in her story too that I think speaks to that. Like when Zeus, when she was really young, Zeus asked her like what she wanted, and she had no problem just kind of listing off all of the things she wanted, like very specifically. Okay, here's what I want. I want some nymphs to hang out with. I need some dogs. I need to be out in the wilderness. I need a short skirt so I can run freely. I'll need a bow. Like she had no problem asserting like her needs or wants.
Right. And in that sense, it's like there's something about that power, that clarity of self-knowing that we very often have when we are young, when we're kids or young adolescents, before we're overly acculturated, right? Before we're so attuned to, well, this is how mom likes me to dress, or, whatever, mm-hmm. like all, because that, of course, we go through that process. But Artemis's like surefire, no hesitation, these are the things that I want, Dad, is expressive of that as a kind of youthful state where we know how we feel, we know what we like, we know what we want, mm-hmm. and there's no questioning, self-questioning.
And not afraid to ask for it.
And not afraid, that's right.
Yeah, not worried about pleasing Papa Zeus or anybody else.
Right. And she doesn't have to, but we get into that trouble trying to please our, the parental authorities. But what Artemis shows us is a very kind of pure relationship to authority in a way. Like, because she embodies her own authority. Mm-hmm. So that's part of the core pattern, right? That sovereignty is a given. It's something that totally shapes that field of consciousness. Mm-hmm. And so she really embodies that.
So one of the things I want to talk with you about, because I think you're so good at articulating this, is the kind of why should we be interested in these mythic figures, these old myths and stories? What do they have to offer us from the perspective of archetypal psychology? And just off the bat, I just want to, I love how Hillman described the archetype as something that denotes value. So more than just a kind of primary pattern in life, but he said in archetypal psychology is the psychology of value.
Right.
And I think, I don't want to kind of jump the gun and get into your answer, but it's one of the things that I think it's really important for people to understand is that it's not just kind of fodder for the mind or the imagination. Not only that, but it also, I think, helps us to value all the different aspects of life and not become too one-sided or too kind of narrow in our view of what's right and what's good and appropriate.
Right, right. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I would say that, myths are the stories of the soul. That's how I would rephrase, what it is that we take from Jung and that Hillman really emphasized in his psychology. As Jung laid out, myths are the primary and irreducible language of the psyche. So that's what I mean by myths are the stories of the soul. And so when we're reading myths, what we're doing is actually engaging in the psyche's own way of describing how it moves and what its values are. What are the principles that belong to life? That's what the gods personify. The gods personify these sort of cosmic, spiritual soul principles that pervade the very nature of life itself. And so when we're reading these stories, we are in relationship to the depths of the psyche, and we can begin to really recognize the power of virginity, solitude, the call of the wild, if we're thinking in terms of Artemis. With Aries or Mars, we are forced to confront the archetypal power of aggression and war. So that's one way to put it. But I think another way to think about it is that when we develop a greater sort of mythic language, meaning that we have stories that give shape to and sense for the very things that we find ourselves drawn for, compelled by, problems that we keep encountering in our life, longings that we just can't quite ever seem to have satisfied. It's the mythic imagination that helps us recognize what it is that's at work in us, who it is that keeps sort of knocking on our door, who we keep trying to find, in our beloved or in our life. And in that sense, myths help us make sense of the confusion or the chaos or the overwhelming emotional experiences that we have and that that shape us. So they can reflect back to us in really powerful ways who and what is happening in our inner world. And that then allows for a conscious relationship with these energies or patterns or stories. And it allows us in a way to do what Joseph Campbell talked about, which was to engage in a kind of creative mythology, which is where we begin to creatively participate in the story making that is at the heart of life, right? Or living meaningfully. It has a lot to do with having adequate stories. I mean, I imagine that that's what you do with your clients, isn't it? You're helping them find more adequate story cradles for their experience. And that's what myth gives us, because it connects us to the psyche. It gets us out of this more personalistic kind of way of thinking about our lives. It connects us to something much deeper. And that too can have a profoundly healing quality. Yeah, I realize I just said kind of a number of different things there, but whatever you feel like picking up there.
Yeah. Well, what's coming to mind is James Hillman's notion of pathologizing
Yeah,
versus what people kind of, I guess, normally, generally think about pathology as being a kind of a disease or symptoms that need to be cured because they're dysfunctional.
right.
And so having that other spin on it, that pathology, logos of pathos, is like the cry of the soul seeking attention, knocking on the door, like you said.
Right.
And I think that's, one of the things about populating your own psyche with more stories and more of these mythic figures is it helps us to differentiate, to allow in, to admit some of those figures that are speaking as symptoms into our kind of inner world,
Right.
so that we're more in relationship with them rather than trying to shut them out,
Right.
through like cognitive behavioral means or pharmaceutical means. I'm thinking here, like what's been coming up recently in my practice is a number of women in middle age who have been confessing just how kind of weary, sick and tired they are of the pressures to be like social with kind of spiritual groups of women, these moon
Mm-hmm.
circles and things like that, or sick and tired of the pressures to always be like a good mother,
Mm-hmm.
and how that's really upheld in our culture as like the most valuable expression of what it means to
Right.
be a woman. And and then kind of in social situations finding that they're bristling against this, or it's kind of really bothering them, and maybe they're acting out in some way. And so I've been talking quite a bit about Artemis lately with these women, and I think again it comes down to value, like to value the retreat, to value the need to be in solitude, to be with
Right.
oneself, to reconnect with who you are at your core, rather than your role as wife, mother, whatever.
That's right.
And so it's like a different approach to pathology. It's a different response to it.
That's right.
And like,
Right.
I would say Hillman that said, myths don't explain, they open.
Yes, that was his whole point. They open, they draw us into asking questions like, why am I, you know, interested in this figure, or where can I see this figure moving in me? It's more about creating the space for attention, paying attention, and connecting our lives and the experiences that we have in our lives to the archetypal depths. See, I think that's a really key thing. An archetypal view of the psyche is one that says there are these archetypal patterns that shape us, and we each, like, I'm claimed by Artemis and Persephone in a way that you are not, that maybe you are claimed by Hermes or Coyote or, other, mythic figures. So we have these, we could say, sort of daimonic necessities that shape each of us individually, even though they are also archetypal, meaning universal patterns. It's that which then gets drawn out and further actualized by our life circumstances, our family of origin, the culture that we're in. So it's, just like understanding that we aren't who we are because of what my mother did to me or what, happened to me when I was a kid, but that there are these archetypal necessities that then this family situation seemed to draw out and amplify and make evident in a powerful way. So that's the archetypal, that being the archetypal view of psychic life.
Can I just pause there for a
Oh,
second?
yeah. Sorry.
I mean, doesn't that view of like necessity, I was born into this family, I went through these experiences to bring out these aspects that are essential to my character.
Yes.
This weird mixture of archetypal patterns that makes me me.
Yes.
Doesn't that change our whole attitude toward, not only what happened to us, but our ideas about integration or individuation?
Yeah.
Like, I think sometimes there's this idea that in order for me to become whole, to pursue this goal of wholeness, which is, kind of a big thing in the transformational psychological world, right? Wholeness.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, we got to become
Yeah.
whole. That there's this idea that I have to somehow have contact or be able to embody all of these different archetypal expressions,
Yeah.
like every chapter in what is it, the gods and goddesses and every man and every woman, that kind of thing. It's like I'm not complete unless I've got some Artemis, I've got some Hestia, I've got some Persephone. And I don't know, like for me, that's not the case. It's more like recognizing like what my own kind of composition is.
That's right.
In terms of these archetypal patterns, and again, valuing that.
That's right. And that's one of the powerful things that astrology can help us really begin to deepen into, which is to see the particular mythic patterns or figures that have a powerful necessity in our life. And that's what a chart helps us more fully imagine into and relate to, really. Yeah, but I really like that, Brian, because see, that's part of, I think, the pathos that you were talking about, which is that there's both enormous gifts that come with being called or touched by certain gods. And then there's also the particular kind of suffering that God brings into life, right?
Yeah.
And so when we are able to really pay attention to and develop a greater awareness of those figures who have a large real estate in our soul or in the inner world, we can then more fully, I think, begin to appreciate the problems that come because we're touched by that God.
Yeah.
So, for example, going back to how you've been sitting with a lot of your female clients and they're bristling. I love that. That was really a very Artemisian, like you can see like a dog, like its hair standing up, like bristling at, someone wanting to put a collar on it. I mean, it's a very
or approach too quickly. I mean, my dog will do that. If people come in and go, oh, she's so cute. She's
right.
The hair goes up. Yeah.
See, that is an Artemisian response to an attempt by an outside influence to affect, touch, shape, influence. It's an animal instinctive response that says, don't come close. When Artemis is prowling, in us, when she's present, that kind of attunement to boundary transgression is sharp.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be very creative and protective, appropriate, right? Because we need to know what we should not let in. I mean, it's very important to know what's toxic people, toxic ideas, right? So yeah. Artemis, in that sense of boundary consciousness,
and to maintain the kind of uncorrupted, the pristine, the virginal.
That's right. She's protecting something. That's right. Something has to be protected. In the metaphorical language of myth, This is her solitude. This is her virginity, her sacred pools, the virgin woods, right?
The grove.
Places that should not be touched or defiled or altered in any way. So Artemis as a hunter, we could see is the one that is defending sacred territory. And it's always something that's pure, right? But that very fierceness and attunement can also be damaging to
our social self, right?
Where vulnerability has to come in, or being willing to be open. You see,
yeah.
And so the pathos, the sort of the difficulties, or the sort of symptoms of Artemis can be a containment or a defensiveness that's actually rigid, right? And so for those of us that have a strong relationship to her, that becomes something that we have to be very aware of. Where am I perhaps have I swung a little too far in terms of demanding the enclosure in my own space? And am I actually disconnecting from something that's equally important, but I feel threatened by? Or you see what I mean?
Yeah, totally. Like that's one of the things I want to talk with you about, like the kind of the other side of it, is that we can become like monotheistic about a particular god, goddess, archetype, right? And yeah, I mean, Hillman writes a lot about the problems with monotheism. We don't need to get into it here, but come on, look at the world right now. Yeah, and so that's part of the idea of the polytheistic psyche as well, is knowing, being able to differentiate, to recognize when we become too one-sided, and that's never healthy. You know, maybe at times I can be in a total like Artemis kind of phase for a month or two, and that's refreshing and rejuvenating for me in some way. But like, I don't know, if we stay in that too long, then I think it neglects other parts of us that need, social connections, intimate connections, all of that stuff.
And I think that's so to go back to, why is myth important? See, when we're reading Artemis myths, we then see the different gods that she's in relationship to, or that show up in these stories. And that helps us begin to differentiate, if I know that I have such a strong connection to her, who are the other gods that I have to actually pay attention to in my life? I'm talking in a very mythopoetic way here, but let me give you a clear example. The story of Hippolytus. Hippolytus was this beautiful youth, and Aphrodite, the goddess of sexual intimacy and, the union and like the power of being with another, right? The power to be with another in a full way. And she wanted Hippolytus to, in a way, worship her, and by that, to be in relationship with someone. And Hippolytus refused. He was so fully dedicated to Artemis that he refused to pay any attention to Aphrodite. Well, we always know that we're in troubling territory. That's that one-sidedness, psychologically speaking. In the imagery of myth, it's this figure saying, no, I won't pay attention to this goddess. Aphrodite's on the verge of having him killed. And Artemis swoops in and takes him away and plops him into a sacred virgin wood that no one knows is there. And he builds a temple to Artemis and lives his life in dedication to the virgin goddess. And he himself remains chaste, right? So that myth isn't telling us we should remain chaste and serve only Artemis. See, that would be the myth explaining. That would be looking at the myth as telling us what to do.
Right.
Rather, this myth is telling us that Aphrodite and Artemis come together in life when one or the other is present in us. And how do we learn to move between these realms well so that we're not destroyed, or needing to be rescued or tempting the gods by our one-sidedness? Hippolytus really helps us think about, let's speak from the Artemisian side, where and how can we be defended from Aphrodite's equally valid and valuable claim on us to be close to another? And where, perhaps, for those of us that have a strong orientation to Aphrodite in our lives, strongly attuned to others and wanting to be close and social and related and intimate, how might we be missing or not hearing the equally valid claims of Artemis upon us? How do we refuel? Or, in the imagery of myth, there's a lot about bathing in sacred pools and renewing ourselves. How do we pay attention to that presence? See? So the myths show us that in the sort of archetypal configurations of the psyche, Aphrodite and Artemis are a pair. How do we learn to move between those two, or to pay attention to them in optimal ways, given our life and our own nature? You see?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like giving each god its due.
Right.
Yeah.
Not in that cookbook encyclopedia way for wholeness, but by recognizing that when we are in the territory of a particular god, another god is present. And this is one of those, kind of maxims. And I think it's ascribed to Plotinus, who said, "No god comes alone. The gods never come alone." We don't get that when we're looking at myth in a very cookbook kind of way. This is why we have to read myths, because then we see, oh, here's Hippolytus, and here's Artemis and Aphrodite. This is an archetypal configuration. This is an archetypal problem. The movement between that dimension of life that is about being open and, like, in the most profound ways receptive to another, thinking about sexual intimacy, Aphrodite, and what it is to be unto ourself and in solitude. This is an archetypal problem that belongs to the soul.
Yeah, great. To watch or listen to the full episode, become a free or paid member by visiting patreon.com/Howl in the Wilderness, or by downloading the Patreon app to your mobile device. Paid memberships start at just $5 a month and offer a number of benefits, including early access to all episodes, the full podcast archives, and the satisfaction of knowing that you're supporting an independent creator directly. Thanks.